Hey everyone, welcome back. Avis, are we good to go ahead and get started?
Yes.
Okay, everyone. So we'll be doing a quick introduction for our speaker today. His name is Alfredo Cardus, and he is the treasurer of the Twin Cities Professional Chapter based out of Minnesota and is a professional with Cummings. So Alfredo, if you could join us.
Hey guys, can you hear me, see me? How's it going? Can you guys hear me, see me?
Yes, we hear you.
Perfect. All right. Well, nice to see you. Nice to be with you guys all today. A little bit about myself, and maybe some of you may have seen this in the slides already, but just gonna to put a name to the face or to put a face to the name. Alfredo, thanks for the introduction. I'm originally from Venezuela. I came to the U.S. in 2015 and have been here since, doing my undergrad, starting up my professional career, and now finishing up my master's degree as well. I am working full-time at Cummins, and I do, as a day job, industrial engineering for a manufacturing facility here in Minnesota. So about 20 minutes north of Minneapolis. We call it the Twin Cities, and I'm here representing the Twin Cities Professional Chapter. So happy to be here with you guys, and happy to share, have a conversation, a discussion with you also.
And that being said, do we have any questions? If not, I could get us started with a quick question. Alfredo, are you good if I ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do it. So one of the questions I have is, who from the chapter board should be involved in the preparation and management of the chapter budget?
Thank you for the question.
Looks like we may have just lost Alfredo. Avis, can you see him?
No, we have lost Alfredo. So I know, William, you have quite a bit of experience in this on this topic also. So why don't you go ahead and answer that question in Alfredo's behalf?
Yeah, no problem. So a little bit about me. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Region 7 Vice President, and I did support the Houston Professional Chapter when I lived there for 3 years. And when it comes to preparing the budget, I would take the approach of getting the whole e-board involved, seeing what events everyone's looking to do, getting that skeleton done of, hey, here's what we're looking to do, here's how much it's going to cost, how are we going to achieve that funding, and essentially making a plan for the full year. And then at the end of the day, that budget is going to sit in the responsibility of the treasurer and the president. Each individual that is responsible for an event, they of course are going to be working on their individual events, but at the end of the day, the treasurer and the president are managing the budget for the organization as a whole. And one of the things that I wanted to mention here, I was taking notes as I read this question, I was writing the question, was check-ins and transparency were very important to me when I was part of the Houston Professional Chapter. Our president at the time, he would actually provide us updates every 2 weeks on how we were doing with funding, any new funding that had come in, any funding needs that we needed, what deadlines we had for getting that money, any signature events that took us 6 months plus to plan, how we were coming along with those. And a lot of those events would generate scholarship funds that would be used to support students in the Texas area. Avis, I'm not sure if there's any other questions. I can't see the chat.
Yes, we've had a question come in. This is from, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing anyone's name, Mara Garcia. It says, how much do you think would be reasonable to leave in the bank account for the next board?
I'll answer that from my experience. And this is going to vary from chapter to chapter. I've talked to even some student chapters. One of the student chapters this last year told me that they had 20K that they were leaving for the next board. And then I've talked to some student chapters that they have 5K, 1K, 0, 100K. I think this is all going to depend on what your guys' goals are. I would be setting up a 5-year plan of what are we looking to do, how are we going to achieve it, and then try to hit that goal every year and pass that plan down as part of your transition to that next e-board. So it's a, hey, here is the 5-year plan that we're working on. We're currently in year 2 of it, or year 1 of it. This is how far we got, and here's what's available for you guys as you come in. And then hopefully it would build off of that. I've met a lot of chapter presidents over the years, both professionals and students, that have told me their goal was to leave the chapter in a better place than they found it. So it's very rare that I do hear, hey, we have no funds. It's always, hey, I started with X amount and now I have X plus this amount for the next e-board, and we're going to transition over. The only time that I see that go down is when something like COVID happens or a chapter goes dormant where they lose access to funds. Hey, Alfredo, welcome back.
Hey, I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm at the office, and one of the issues we're having today is internet and connectivity issues, apparently. So,
No problem. I did give my 2 cents on the question while you were out. I'm not sure if you want to add it, or I know you didn't hear what I said. I'm not sure if you have anything, 1 or 2 sentences that you wanted to include on the who from the chapter board should be involved in the treasure or in the preparation and the management of the budget. If not, we'll move on to question 2. Up to you.
I can briefly touch on it, and you probably already covered it. But what I was just going to say is just, in my belief and opinion, there should be an accountable person that the responsibility relies with, to ensure that it's accurate and that somebody's on top of it. But it's by no means an individual effort or a standalone island person that's doing all this by themselves. It should be collaborative, and it should be a team effort of everybody that has spend and priorities for the chapter. So in my opinion, all of the board should have a say, and there should be regular reviews and updates, so that everybody's aware and kind of in the same page of what you're trying to do, what you're preparing to do, and where you're taking the chapter, with the accountability relying on the treasurer.
Perfect. We didn't even plan that, and we kind of aligned on our answers. So I like your answer as well. Alfredo, I'm going to go to my second question that I have here. And audience, remember, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. I now can see the chat, and we'll be able to read those off to Alfredo. But Alfredo, I have a question for you here. What are some resources that you recommend for chapter leaders who are not as experienced in formulating budgets? So I know nothing. Where do I go to start on my budget, right?
Yeah, I'd say that the first thing, there's a ton of tools out there that you could use for personal finances. There's even Excel files that you could use like as a template to start you with. I think the starting point for if you know nothing, the starting point of the budget is, what do you plan to accomplish, and an estimate or a best guess, if you will, of how much that's going to cost. So you can then come back and say, okay, what's the amount of money that I would need to cover that expense, right? And so I think there's 2 sides to this. I would recommend looking and maybe playing around with a few templates, whether that's online, whether that's Excel, whether that's a spreadsheet. It doesn't hurt to understand a little bit more about the very basics of a financial statement, maybe or some financial statements like an income statement, as you plan to bring income, as you plan to spend some of the money or the costs you incur of a chapter. The more you can think in detail about what those expenses will be. So like chapter programming is probably a very broad term, right? But if you say Noche de Ciencias and National Convention participation, and you start allocating some money for those, it can be very detailed, and it can help you plan better how much money you'll actually need. I think the other thing that I'll say is there's the resources and asynchronous and some courses out there on how to do some financial planning. But there's 2 sides to it that are a little maybe more human. I'd say rely on your previous boards where possible, or your body of knowledge, whatever's documented. In our instances, we've used a Google Drive that's transitioned from board to board. And let's say, for example, I was a bad treasurer and didn't document things. It doesn't mean that the person that came before me didn't do a better job, right? And so that may be archived somewhere. So try to find as much as possible information there. Or if the previous person was a really, really good person, then maybe reach out and have that as a training session of like, okay, what's the most urgent things to take care of? And if nothing else, I think there's always an opportunity out there to collaborate with other SHIP chapters, potentially your regional representatives. And I think the SHIP structure is there to support SHIP chapters in their operations. So maybe leveraging resources of your region would be something to not overlook if you're kind of trying to get started, you're struggling to maybe do the very basics. Some of those leaders in our regional representation have been through successful professional chapters and could, give you some pointers, get you started, point you in the right direction, or at the very least, just introduce you to somebody or a different chapter in the region that could lend a hand.
I love that worst case, you can always go to a peer and get some mentorship from another SHIP chapter. I do have another question here for you, Alfredo. On the sponsorship package, something recommended for professional chapters. Do you have any guidance there? Any advice on what to offer companies? It was really easy as a student chapter to offer talent and have them come recruit, but that's not always the case for the professional chapters.
No, I'm totally on board with that. I think it really depends on what relationship you're trying to develop with your sponsors, right? And in many cases, that could be opportunities for outreach, for example, where in a lot of cases, corporations and maybe larger companies, if that's your target audience, right, are looking to fulfill a lot of diverse and equity and inclusion targets and initiatives and drives. And there's opportunities for the professional chapters to leverage that from larger companies. There's smaller companies potentially that are not necessarily as structured in their DEI approach, for example, but maybe looking to get more visibility or more connections or try to develop some working relationships across engineering talent and engineering professionals in the region. So that's maybe a different approach or a different benefit that you could collaborate with to some smaller companies. I think it's really understanding what you're trying to go after and how that relationship can be meaningful. In our case, and I'll kind of take it down to an example that's kind of tangible. A lot of our sponsors are targeted for slightly larger, maybe mid to large size corporations. And we use a lot of our programming as opportunities for outreach to them. So we have a scholarship gala where a lot of our sponsors directly earmark some of the sponsorship or a portion of the sponsorship for that to directly go to a Hispanic engineering talent. And we facilitate this process with the student chapters, with the high schools, or with some high schools in the region, where we see a good opportunity to collaborate and to partner with. We also do Noche de Ciencias, and we've had workshops hosted by Cummins, by Medtronic, by Neste. We've had different organizations that come through and interact and combine multiple DEI or multiple dimensions of diversity and equity. And so I think, it really is trying to understand how your programming through the year and through your time as a leader of the chapter can help benefit that partner or their sponsor.
Yeah, and I think everything you said is good. One thing I do want to add that I've seen success with is targeting the ERGs at the companies. A lot of those folks want to be engaged. And then something I've recently found out I never thought about when I was a student was the company matching programs. A lot of companies have where they'll match volunteer time. So we were actually able to raise a ton of money in Region 7 through companies matching programs, and those were able to be used for scholarships and to fund travel stipends for students.
That's a good idea. I'll take note of that because I didn't know that. Or I haven't leveraged that in the past, so I'll take a note of that actually.
Absolutely. So let me pick another question here for you. What do you believe is the best way to reach out and onboard corporate or external sponsors?
Yeah. Well, William, I think you maybe got us started on that question. I think a lot of the times ERGs are the easiest way to come into or to get a foot in the door potentially, because normally ERGs are looking, or that's their whole mission or their purpose is to have that link and to foster that, in a way, community of certain affinity. And for those that maybe didn't catch the acronym, ERG is in most cases employee resource group. Most companies, or a lot of big companies, have established ERGs that have found some degree of affinity, whether that's in pride, in veterans, in the Black networks of many large corporations, and the Latino networks of many corporations. And I think in those groups, you can often see leaders that are trying to have an impact in their community. So there's many networking spaces. There's other networking or other hosted networking opportunities that you can find locally just by looking up. And we've done some of this, is like take ourselves through like Eventbrite or through what's happening in our city and stuff like that, and go network, right? Go mingle, seeing people face to face, not just getting a name off of, a relative, a friend, a colleague, somebody that you studied with or something like that. Those are impersonal, and a lot of times, sometimes even emails coming from an external source, like a professional chapter, could even end up in the junk folder. So a lot of times those may not even hit the person that you wanted to hit. So I think, when possible, or if you have the opportunity to go engage and connect with others that will most likely be involved in those ERGs, you have a much larger shot of landing a relationship with them.
Yeah, I totally agree. Networking in person is key. I actually went to an Alpha event recently and also went to a Latinas in Tech event, and they're trying to do a lot of the same stuff that we're doing. They're trying to impact the community. So I was like, okay, how do I leverage both organizations to work together to make a bigger impact? So 100% agree. Let me see what we got here. We got another question here. What has been your largest challenge in managing a chapter budget, and how did you handle it? I think this is perfect because you're a treasurer.
Yeah, I'll say most chapters will come in with a large vision, and I think a lot of the times we don't realize how much it costs to make that large vision a reality. I think a risk that I have seen happen across the board is potentially underestimating how much something could, or how expensive a specific program could be. And then a lot of the times the mitigation plan or something that I've seen done is you just have to recognize when to scale down, right? So you have essentially two options. If you have done it far ahead enough that you recognize the challenge in front of you with raising that capital, you've put a ton of work into developing those sponsorships, those relationships, potentially chase grants or different fundraising activities, like there's auctions, there's picnics, there's all sorts of stuff that I've seen chapters effectively do to get that income to support the spend. But when you don't get that income to support the spend, I think it's key to understand your scale and your scope and play accordingly, right? So if you wanted to have a Noche de Ciencias event that covers 100 students, but in reality, and you had planned, say, $1,000, but in reality, you only have now 600, then maybe, is there ways that you can maybe downsize your events to still have a meaningful impact and to still leverage that as the start of a relationship, or potentially as a selling point into next year to say, hey, we want to scale and grow into this vision. But really trying to not stretch it too thin, where the meaning of the event or the quality of the event is harmed in any way by potentially underspending. or you could end up at the other side of it, putting the chapter at risk of going too far under or too far overspent, I guess. So that's also a risk.
On that comment there on the Noche de Ciencias, remember there are funding options from Ship National that they will help you fund in reimbursement form. So you put the money up first, and then they will reimburse you based off how many students or parents attend the Noche de Ciencias. So look at opportunities just beyond what cash is in the bank. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and to that point, I think maybe Ship National reimburses, but there's also companies that may not be willing to sponsor your chapters, I don't know, social gatherings and things like that, but maybe very explicitly interested. And that's something that as a chapter you can agree to earmark and really, with a lot of transparency, use the funds as instructed or as directed by your sponsor, and have a very nice collaboration in that.
Nice. All right. Well, I got another question for you here, Alfredo. They just keep coming. Alfredo, did you see your board's plans affected in any way, shape, or form by inflation? And then did you ever have to reassess plans for an event/set of events because of it?
Not necessarily inflation. I think we all see, or we've all seen, depending on how long you've been in your professional world or things like that, we've all seen things get more expensive. I think it's important year over year to plan for more expensive, not necessarily just in the magnitude of inflation. So if inflation holds at like 5-6%, for example, it's not necessarily to say that all of your expenses in the normal operation of the chapter will go by that factor. But I think it is safe to say, hey, within 8 to 10%, our board will probably, if there's some consistency in the board and you see a growing trend, our board will most likely consistently continue to spend higher, right? If you have a growth pattern, right? If your board's downsizing, if you're potentially struggling, then maybe downsize to a point where your budget's much more attainable. But I think that's more consistent with what the board looks like, what the priorities are for the year, what type of programming you want to do, and then just year over year be mindful that things have been getting a little bit more expensive. I couldn't say that there's a direct correlation between inflation specifically and how we do our planning.
Thank you. I'm kind of upset that 5 to 6% has now become the normal after the last 2 to 3 years, but I was like, oh, that is the reality. Okay.
Fact check me, please, but I think it's somewhere over there.
Yeah, no, it feels like it. So I'm with you. All right. My chapter has been trying to implement a scholarship endowment fund. Do you have any experience trying to create a budget for yearly scholarships and how we strive to allocate funds for that current year and allocate other funds to grow that money?
So I'll start by saying that the endowment piece potentially is much more complicated than I'm qualified in any way or form to explain. So I wouldn't want to necessarily call it endowment. But what I will say is the way we're planning for our scholarships is we include them as part of the our financial objective for the year. So if we want to, for example, sponsor 5 students at $2,000 a piece, or that could be 3 students at $3,000 a piece, and any combination of that, and we say, okay, we're going after $9,000 or $10,000, or maybe that's $20,000 for a chapter. I don't know. That's just part of how much you have to raise. Year over year, I think, depending on, again, the consistency of the board, the success of your previous events, your level of reach and connection in the community, you can see whether year over year in reality means growth in what that scholarship means, or whether that means that you have to downsize for a year or you want to maintain your previous year's target. I will say that the Twin Cities, in full transparency, we had a really good year in our scholarship fund. in 2022, this past fiscal year, 2023, we had a good year, but it was about 60% of what 2022 was. And we're planning, or we're shooting for raising that to about 75% of what 22 was in this coming year, 2024. So it's a moving target. I think it's got to be reasonable for the board to accomplish, or you're at the risk of over leveraging that board and then potentially putting yourself in a cumbersome spot. I think the way we've done planning, to answer the last bit of that question, which is how do you plan that for that fund, is we go after our sponsors, right? If we exceed the amount collected that we plan to collect, then, depending on what the voting rules of your chapter are, you can always vote and increase the value or the dispersible amounts, depending also on the selection of candidates. And to that point, I think this one's more, not so much in the budgeting and the finances and all that, more so on the scholarship side, is making sure that truly great candidates, and that you're truly empowering Hispanic talent in engineering. And sometimes that means a lot of money. Sometimes that means, maybe more targeted to certain groups of students and things like that. So just at the end of the day, the objective of the scholarship will also help dictate how much money is too much or how much money is too little.
Something I will add, Alfredo. So here in Tampa Bay, there are some Microsoft employees who have been trying to set up an endowment, and they wanted to set it up with the University of South Florida. The idea being, hey, we have alumni, we have Microsoft employees, and we can use the company match to get that. The cool part about it was that the university had a person assigned to guide us through the whole process, and then the university takes care of it. We don't have to handle it. I believe Shep National also has this capability. I believe Robert is responsible for that. So there is someone also, if you try to do this with Shep National, what we saw at the local ERG was not everyone was a Shep member, but they wanted to donate money. So we were like, okay, we're still going to do some good in the community by getting this endowment set up with the university. So that's a work in progress. So that might be another area to explore for SHIP chapters if they want to do something more local, and then they can get local companies to support that endowment as well. And I know we have like 2 minutes. So, it looks like we are being told to wrap it up. Alfredo, do you have any last words or any comments for the group?
Yeah, I'll just wrap it up. And it was probably towards the last couple of slides in the presentation. So feel free to go back to those. But I think the key there is there's many ways, there's many templates, there's many tools that can help you or guide you through how to break it down. The key as a treasurer or as the budget holder is to understand what level of risk you're putting your chapter in throughout the year, right? So you want to end up in a positive balance or at least break even, so that it's a meaningful year for the board. It's successful event planning. It's successful money planning. A few things that help in doing that are spreading your major spends. That was a lesson learned for me last year. We're too close to each other. Spend is much harder to plan and anticipate. And then just make sure that you're shooting for the highest amount of transparency possible, right? You won't be in that position forever. Most likely you'll hand it off. So be mindful that somebody's going to have to deal with the decisions we're making, that with the way you're planning. And so the clearer and cleaner that you can maintain the documentation, the easier it'll be for the next person. And truly, credit where credit's due. The reason I managed to get here and get invited was a very successful handoff from the previous person to me. So I'm very grateful, and I hope to do the same for the next treasurer of the Twin Cities.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Alfredo. And I think that brings us to the end of this session. Anything else that's needed to be shared, Avis, or are we good?
You're good. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. It's nice to meet you.
Thank you, Alfredo.